things to consider before we get on. First of all, I think Ellie is going to tell us a story specifically in relation to her and her family. And I think Steve is going to give us a background of what the kind of numbers tell us about what really needs to be done, so that we can have a conversation about it, but can reinforce, I think, the importance that organ donation is for patients across the country and across Worcestershire in particular. So, Vicky, are you going to introduce Ellie, or is Ellie going to get straight on with it?
I think you've just said what I would have covered today.
All right, sorry.
So I think what I've agreed with the team. I mean, I've had the privilege of meeting with Clemmy, who's provided a lot more information to me in terms of how the team work, but also the privilege of watching Ellie's video, which is really inspiring, and I think creates the awareness that all of us need to discuss, you know, with our own families as well. But I think handing over to Ellie first to share a story, and then for the team to pick up on some of the facts which Stephen's going to cover. So thank you, Sir David. Over to Ellie.
Ellie, I'm a staff nurse that works in A&E at Worcester, and 6 years ago my brother took his own life. He was in the research department in A&E and then was taken out to ITU, where he was cared for 2 days by the intensivists. And although they worked incredibly hard, there wasn't anything to save. And we as a family had a discussion with the consultants, who said that Jake's body was starting to fail, and we could either withdraw treatment or had we thought about organ donation. And my brother had said to me several times over that he wanted his body to be donated for scientific research and for to be experimented on, and for the good that could come out of his body to be done. So I knew that although he hadn't expressly said that he wanted to be an organ donor, that this was something that he would want had he had the choice, or had he told us that that was his choice. So I fought quite hard against my mum, who was completely against it, because she, as I think any parent would, wanted her son to be buried complete. But I knew that it was what Jake wanted, and that this was something that could bring us all a lot of peace in the years to come, trying to overcome his death. And so managed to persuade her that this Jake would have wanted had he had the choice. So we made the decision to go ahead with organ donation, which is where we met Emma, who was a specialist nurse for organ donation in Worcester at the time. And she, as I'm sure Clemmy and Victoria are the most incredible nurses that you will ever meet, and was so incredibly compassionate towards us and explained the process in such a calming way that we couldn't have backed out of it. It was something that we knew we needed to do, and we knew would bring us a lot of peace going forwards. So we went forward with the process, and I think the biggest thing for us is it gave us a bit more time with Jake. It gave us another 12 hours in ITU before they turned off his life support, where we could all say the things that we needed to say, and you know, a family that hadn't been there previously could come in and say goodbye, and just give us that time, that extra bit of time to get the closure that we needed, and to make sure that, you know, everything that was said needed to be said, which I'm so grateful for now, because had we not gone forward with organ donation, Jake would have deteriorated very, very quickly, that he would have continued on for, and I don't think any of us were quite ready at that point to say goodbye or to really understand what was happening. So the extra time was just invaluable to us. But I think the biggest thing for my family is what has happened afterwards. Since Jake was a donor, he has saved the lives of 3 people. We've had letters from 2 family members of Jake's recipients of his organs to say thank you, and how the organs have changed their lives, which we didn't ever expect to find out where they went or how they changed, how they helped people. So that's been incredible. And the stuff that the trust does in particular, so the organ donation memorial that's at the front of the hospital, and the regular meetings that the committee holds to support families of organ donors, that's brought us so much, joy and given us a place where we can grieve and be with people who've been through very similar things, and share that moment of grief with somebody who actually understands what it is that you've gone through, which is rare. And then the boxes that the specialist nurse for organ donation do after somebody's gone to be a recipient, to be a donor, where you get a look of the patient's hair and a handprint, and those things we wouldn't have thought about needing, but actually we're so grateful that we have them. My family, we have a handprint with us wherever we go, my brother, and those things we wouldn't have got had we not gone forward with organ donation. So they've given us so much in that respect. But the biggest thing is that in the time of incredible darkness, organ donation was a beacon of light and hope to us, knowing that my brother had done something so remarkable and so good out of what was a terrible, terrible time. And I'm so grateful that we had the option to put Jake forward to be an organ donor, and that the consultant and the specialist nurses were there to support us through that and to help us make that decision, because it's given us such a good way of dealing with our grief, and knowing that Jake was one of those young adults that did not have a diagnosis of depression at the time of his death, had not had any previous suicide attempts, and did it very, very well on that first time. So it was a shock to our family. It was just overwhelmingly sad and tragic, and actually something incredibly good and incredibly powerful has come out of that, and I'm so grateful that we had the opportunity. And I think that's all I have to say.
So thank you so much to Ellie for the generosity of that, Connolly.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that. I thought that was absolutely remarkable and moving, and not only that, your presence of mind at that particular moment in the circumstances to stick out for the organ donation in relation to it was remarkable. Are there any comments or questions people want to make about Ellie, about what Ellie said, or ask any questions? Anita.
Thank you, David. Ellie, thank you very much for sharing that story. I think you did it incredibly powerfully. I totally agree with David that I found that very moving. Really just a question. You said that at the time it had been quite difficult to persuade your mother of that course of action. With hindsight, does she have any regrets? How did she feel about it? What was her journey from starting off being, very, very unkeen on the idea? Yeah. Did she come to terms with it? Did she feel it was the right thing to do in the end?
Absolutely, and she knows now that we have made the right decision, and it is what Jake would have wanted. I think just the thought of him having to go through an operation and the process of donation, she wasn't keen on. But even in the days afterwards, she knew that we'd made the right organ donation team to say where his organs had gone to. I think she found it really useful, and she does now, and she is a big supporter of organ donation. She's very involved with the Organ Donation Family Network, which is a charity that supports families of donors through their bereavement. So she knows that we made the right choice, and she's very happy that I persuaded her, I think.
Thank you.
Shall we move on then? Because that's about the very, very personal and human story around all of it. Can we then think about the kind of broader question of the impact on the population and patients generally? I think Steve's going to talk to us about that.
Yeah, I've sent a PowerPoint presentation. I don't know whether that can be shared. Oh, thank you, Kimara. So if you the next slide, please. I think what I've got here is what happens when you take what will be all the very, very powerful stories in their own way, very similar to Ellie's story, and you boil them down and you end up with some numbers and statistics. And yes, it's very important to look at the statistics, but behind each one of these patients on this list is a story that's going to be similar to Ellie's. If we go back a few years now, in 2012, 3 patients a day roughly on average were dying waiting for an organ transplant. In 2020, the current figures show, I think it's fallen just below 1 patient per day on average is dying waiting for a transplant. So there's been a huge improvement over the last 8 years. In 2019, over 6,000 patients were on the transplant list. And that's fallen quite a lot by a sort of snapshot figure for this year, although it may well be there's an excess of deaths because of COVID or for whatever reason. And lots of opportunities are still being lost, unfortunately. And much of that is there's always something to be gained by finding more opportunities to refer or make sure we're picking up every opportunity to refer for organ donation, but not everybody is allowing the consent. So next slide, please. So for England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, we're sort of stuck. These are combined rates for DBD and DCD. Do you need me to explain what the difference is between those at all?
Please, would you?
Yeah. So DBD is where somebody is certified dead by neurological means. So what would have been referred to colloquially as brain death. And then there is absolutely no hope for any neurological recovery or consciousness, and the patient's heart will continue to beat, but they have no capacity to breathe for themselves. So they're kept alive on a ventilator. That's a DBD. A DCD is death by cardiac death, which is still usually going to be of great neurological consequence in the fact that the patient will be very, very severely brain damaged, but does not meet very strict legal criteria for brain death. Even so, it's considered that the patient is in a hopeless situation. Death will be inevitable, but these patients are extubated from a ventilator and just allowed for nature to take its course and let them pass away naturally. If they die within certain criteria of time, which varies from organ to organ, but if they die within certain time frames, say an hour or so at most for a liver or 3 hours or so for kidneys, then the organs can then be harvested in a theatre environment after the heart has stopped beating. That's the difference between the two. But the combined rates of consent between those two different types of donations is only about 2/3 across the UK, except in Wales, where they changed the law to an opt-out system in 2015, and they're now seeing something around 80% consent rates. So they've seen there's a big difference, and that's going to crept up year on year. Next slide, please. The change in law that came in May was still put through, even though we were in the middle of the pandemic, because if we hadn't allowed it to go onto statute, potentially it could have been another 18 months or 2 years before it got finalised onto the statute book. So it was allowed to pass into law as it was going to have done. But the rollout of publicising it obviously had to be a lot softer because there were other imperatives for facing the nation at the time. And essentially what we have is an opt-out system now, whereby with some exclusions, but basically anybody who is an adult, normally resident in England for the last 12 months, who has mental capacity to have made a decision, is presumed to have consented unless there is some evidence that they wish to opt out. The easiest way to see whether they've opted in or opted out is on the organ donor register, but we will accept evidence of conversation. So that's why we really, really want people to say, just talk to your family, let your family know. And the number of people, I think it's around 90% of people generally would consider that they would be prepared to give organ donation, allow their organs to be used for the good of others. And yet the number of people who give consent when it comes to asking the family is much, much lower than that. And that's because a lot of families say, oh, I didn't know, I didn't want to sort of do something they didn't want. But most people, far more people are prepared to donate than we seem to be getting consent for. So that was why the law was changed, to try and capture some more people and then push it up towards the figures that Wales has got. If we look at recent figures across the trust, this is combined figures for the Worcester site and the Alex site. For the whole of 2019, there were 23 referrals to the specialist nurses for organ donation team. And so far this year, to date, we've already got 14, and that's including the big shutdown during the COVID pandemic, where organ transplantation almost came to a halt, which I'll come on to. If we drill down into those figures on the next slide a little bit, please. So of those eligible donors, 23 for 2019 and 14 so far this year, progress to actually requesting consent, as shown, 20 and 13 respectively. What we see this year is the use of telephone consent because of a couple of issues with pandemics and not necessarily being able to get hold of families by other means, no families being attendant in the hospital. What we've had 100% rate on, which I'm very proud of this year, is that the SNODs have actually been in attendance at the time of the referral, when we've actually made the request to the families. And we know statistically that when the SNOD is present, we have a much, much higher consent rate of approval to go ahead with organ donation. The other values on the table are incidental values, where other tissues have been taken, even if alongside of solid organs such as liver or kidney, or instead of if they've proven not suitable in the end. So even if somebody's on the organ donor register, it's more than just organs. There's tissues, collagen, bone tissue, skin can be used in burned patients, and also the lenses of the eyes, not the lenses, the corneas of the eyes for transplant as well. Next slide, please. So during the pandemic, there was about a 3-month period where there was an almost complete shutdown of the national donation and transplantation programs. Only the most urgent cases went ahead. They reduced the age criteria, I think it was to 50, whereas normally it's 80 or 85. So they were taking only considering the fewest numbers of patients that have the best opportunity to proceed to a donation, and any sign that the patient could possibly have had COVID, possibly even to the extent of coming from a unit that had COVID positive patients, it became a contraindication. So you can understand from that why it almost ground to a halt. Next slide, please. This is a graph that I was sent recently from National Figures, and shows that if you just look at the values for numbers of donations in the month of July for the last 10 years, we're in a complete bounce back here, because we've actually hit a record high for the number of donations and transplants made in the month of July. So it would seem that despite the COVID pandemic where everything shut down, we're very much getting back on track with the overall program, and things are going forward, I hope, to get us back where we want to be. Next slide, please. So we have an ongoing process. It's never perfect. There's never enough, or we're still not in a situation where we can say we've got an excess of organs. There's a process of continued education of the medical staff to the changes. There's obviously new doctors, new nurses coming through all the time. They always have to be updated on a rolling program. If there are any missed opportunities, we try and investigate those. And if there's any opportunities that may or may not have gone through successfully, if it didn't follow best practice, then we try and learn from that and make sure that we do things absolutely as dictated, as guided by NHSBT. What we like to do is encourage early referral. There were a couple of episodes in 2019 where we did not manage to get a SNOD in attendance at the time of approaching a family. And I think when we drilled down into the effects of that, they were probably because they were not being referred until the last moment when the consultant on the ICU was saying, this is now the point where we're going to withdraw. Whereas what we would certainly promote is a parallel planning. So you're admitting a patient to the ICU, you know that their life is in danger. We often have a suspicion that this is not going to go well for the patient. And while we provide all the best care in the hope the patient will recover, we also plan with the contingency that if they're not going to survive, what are we going to do? And we may be looking at the possibility of an organ donation. So let's plan that in parallel and alongside it so that when it comes to it, we can make the referral to the SNODs, have the SNODs ready for talking to the patient's family as and when. There's a need for ongoing promotion to the wider community. And I'd just like to finish up by saying such a huge thanks to Clemmy and Victoria for their help in preparing this and their dynamism that they brought in only the first few months in their job. So welcome to the job, and fell into the pandemic as they started their roles. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Just to point out as well, we have shared a PowerPoint presentation, hopefully with everybody, just letting you all know what Victoria and I have been busying ourselves with during National Organ Donation Week, which of course is this week.
Thank you. Are there any questions, comments people want to make about all of that? I think it's a very comprehensive view about what we're doing. Notice there wasn't a final slide, which we normally get in these circumstances, which is, so what do you want us to do? But I'll take that as read. Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks, Steve, Clemmy, Ellie, and Victoria. Obviously, this is it's a topic very close to my heart, having been greedy enough to have both a live donor kidney transplant, but also the fortunate recipient of a donated kidney from somebody like Ellie's family. So I'm really pleased that we've been able to bring this topic to the board on the board day that sits within the annual week that's focused on organ donation, because the stories that we've heard today, both in terms of the conversations that Ellie bravely had with her family, the decisions that were taken, the courageous role of the intensive care team, the specialist nurses. These are things that happen in our hospitals every single day of the year, and I think the quality of care, the compassion that is shown to people, is happening every single day in our hospitals. And I was really keen that we could get some exposure at the board meeting of some of the fantastic work that goes on, but also some of the real life tragedies that also go on a day-to-day basis in our hospitals, because this is the real work that goes on day in, day out, that our fantastic staff are involved with. And just to share a personal experience, when I was called in March 2017 to have my kidney transplant, I wasn't yet on dialysis, so I was quite fortunate. I didn't have to wait too long on the waiting list, unlike many people that do. And what you don't know when you're being prepared to go to theatre is you do not know where the kidney is coming from, or the organ, depending on what transplant you're having. Or I certainly didn't know in March 17. I knew it was quite a long way away, so I was assuming it was somewhere beyond Watford, further north. You also don't know the circumstances at that point. But what you do know is that, or certainly I was aware, was that there had been some difficult conversations within a family to agree to that consent. And I just really want to promote the importance of, if anybody is on the register for organ donation, please make sure your family are aware, because otherwise, as Steve and Ellie have said, there is the risk that up to 9 people won't get the benefit of organ transplantation. And as Steve's pointed out, that could be leading to people dying unnecessarily. So I just wanted to again thank everybody, thank Ellie and the team for what's been a fantastic exposition and exposure of the day-to-day fantastic work that goes on in our hospitals. So thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that, Matthew. I think that's a really useful kind of way of summing the arrangement. Thanks for the work that you do, and thanks for presenting to us. And you've got the complete support of the board behind you to do whatever we need to do to make a success of this programme. Thanks to Victoria and Clemmy. As an aside, I think we need to think about a different title for you. I think being an embedded snod doesn't sound to me like a thing that, if someone said, what do you do for a living? I'm sure you think of better things, but it doesn't reflect what you do. And can I particularly thank Ellie? I think in these places of social distancing and all the rest of it, if I could have gave you a hug afterwards, I would have done. A sort of virtual hug, I think, from us all to you, Ellie, and thanks very much. And I just finish off with those words that you used, because I wrote them down because I thought they were really important. That in the darkness around Jake's death, the potential transplant was a beacon of light and hope. And I thought that was a really fantastic way of expressing what is a really important thing. So thank you very much for all of that. And thanks for the contribution everyone has made. And just as I'm sure all of us register, but just make sure that we, as individuals, and those of you who are watching on YouTube, make sure that you talk to your relatives to make sure that everyone really understands why you want to do it and what you want to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go on then. Let's move on then to items of any other business at the end of the meeting. Is there anything that people want to raise, just so we know now? No, I assume not. Declarations of interest, they're on the website. Can I then move on to the minutes of the previous meeting? Are they a reasonable reflection, first of all? Yes, this is where we mark Kamara's homework. Yes, well done, Kamara. 10 out of 10 for that. Very good. And the action log. Anything you want to say about the action log, Kamara?
Just to say, Chair, that there's one still outstanding action which I'm hoping will be able to have training for the Trust Board on the Mental Health Act requirements for board members and dementia training on the 10th of December in the afternoon. I'm just getting confirmation of the dementia training. I have fixed the other one, and all other actions, Chair, have been closed unless anyone wants to challenge me or have any other issues that I haven't picked up.
I'm fine with that. Yes, good. Okay. Right, Chairman's report. I just want to talk here about the way in which the board is moving forward in its structure. The first thing and the most obvious, can I thank Steve for the tremendous contribution he's made to the board over probably its most difficult period in its existence. The movement between one set of management arrangements and another, moving from being in special measures, being put in special measures and coming out of it. And Steve's done a fantastic job. There will be an opportunity, I think, undoubtedly, opportunities before he finally leaves his term office is up at the end of December. But thanks very much for everything that you've done there, Steve. Can I congratulate Anita? She's been appointed for another 4 years. I think that's an increase in the sentence, or whether it's I'm sure she's very happy with that. Congratulations to all of that. We've changed the membership of committees around a little bit. You'll have seen that. I discussed it with everyone as we've gone around. I think it gives the right amount of continuity and change that we need to get things forward. And as far as recruitment is concerned, I'm particularly the issue, as you imagine, in front of all of our faces at the moment is how can we create more opportunity now with the appointment of a non-executive and an associate non-executive to be creative about all of this. So we'll be going out to try and get the best possible two people that we can to enable us to increase and improve the performance of the board and its diversity. Okay, thank you for, thank you myself for that. That's that. Let's move on then to the Chief Executive's report.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll take the paper as read. I'll draw out a couple of the points. The work that we did last year as a board to set out our strategic intent, and also, as part of that, the refresh of our vision and our purpose as an organisation, we agreed that we would move to implement a single well-evidenced improvement methodology within the organisation. And I'm pleased to note that in a post sort of first phase of COVID world now, we are now progressing, as the paper sets out, with moving forward with the support of NHS Improvement to get a readiness assessment completed this month, so we can then choose a partner to work alongside us to roll this out. It's noted later in my trust management executive paper, but our senior clinical leaders in the trust were very, very keen to progress with this at pace, because they recognise, as we come through the COVID first phase, now is the time to really accelerate the continuing improvement of patient care and productivity within the organisation. Second point to draw out, Chair, is welcome to David Hill, who's with us this morning. Colleagues will remember this, that the appointment of David was part of the recommendations from the Care Quality Commission and NHS Improvement in response to the improvement that was noted by the Care Quality Commission when they inspected our hospitals in May and June of 2019, but recognised that for that rate of improvement to continue, that the wider health and care system within Worcestershire needed to work more constructively and closely with the organisation. And part of that was putting in place a support package, one element of which was the appointment of a system improvement director. So David started with us a few weeks ago. He's already getting a good feel for the areas of focus. We know, don't we, that two of our main areas of challenge in Worcestershire are around the emergency and urgent care provision and also the financial situation, and those are two areas that David will be working alongside us with. You'll see there shortlisted for awards and some really good innovative working that is going on, particularly around the digital changes. And I thought I'd just draw attention, Chair, to a couple of the recent national changes. The establishment of the National Institute for Health Protection. We'll see how that impacts on the approach to COVID response, particularly with the, I think, imminent escalation of national response to the COVID virus. And then also aligned to that, I think, has been the real sense of understanding, and we've discussed this recently at our board in relation to the impacts and the experiences of our people in the county and our staff who are from a Black, Asian and minority ethnic background. And I'm pleased to see that Marie Gabriel, who I know well from North East London has been appointed to lead the NHS Race and Health Observatory, and will, I think, want to work closely with her on helping to move that forward. So I'll pause there, David, and happy to take any questions on my report.
Any questions?
Could I ask one, please, David?
Yes, Mark.
Just very quickly on your last paragraph there, accepting there's a lag between medical students and medical placements, are we heading for conflict of having not enough placements or not enough for too many students, according to what your paragraph reads?
I think not, Mark, because one of the things that we've been doing is working very closely with the University of Worcester, but also we've been working closely with the other universities medical students to make sure that we've got the ability to support our local medical school as a priority. So I think between Mike and I, we are wanting to make sure that we can support the Worcester students as best we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on then to Restoration and Recovery Plan Phase 3. Jo.
Thank you, Chair. So again, I'll assume people have read the paper, and firstly, just to draw to your attention that this is a part 1 and there is a part 2 in the private section which goes into some more detail. So the purpose of putting the paper before you is to share the Phase 3 guidance issued at the end of July, which details our approach for the next phase as we restart services. The detail is enclosed in the paper, but just to draw your attention to 2 or 3 different points. Just to remind ourselves what we're about is trying to deliver safer services, sustainable services, and a system-first approach. And I think when you look at the detail in the narrative, you can see how that plays through. So the ask is for us to get back to near normal levels of non-COVID health services compared to this time last year by the end of October. We need to make sure we prepare for winter demand pressures and the potential surges we heard earlier of COVID-19 outbreaks. And we need to take account of lessons learned, and we've rehearsed that, I think, as a board previously. A couple of pivots in terms of the narrative that we're asked to provide. There's a real focus on making sure we're very inclusive in the work that we do, that we take into account our vulnerable communities and populations, including making sure that they have access, including digital access, as we look at our innovations. And the STP is setting up a Health and Equalities Board to really drive that agenda forward. And we also held last week a workshop as part of our clinical services strategy with the Director of Public Health, which talked about actually the GSNA, so the Health and Equalities and Population Health Management, which is going to be a key focus. Just moving on, you'll see there are several sections that we've had to take account of in terms of preparing the submission, which is due in by the 21st of September. I can confirm that we are on course to deliver that. Activity and performance, as I say, will be mainly in part 2, but there is also a requirement from a workforce perspective to deliver as part of the people plan. The timeline for that is a few days after the 21st submission, but you can see the detail in there. The finance position, the block contract is being continued to year end. And there are obviously implications in terms of the high impact changes. We've looked at realigning of those, but actually the work we were doing is very much in line with what's come out with the guidance. So those are the highlights, and obviously happy to take any questions and also to bring in colleagues from the gallery as required. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. Any questions, comments? Yes, Matthew.
Yeah, I wonder if it might be helpful just to note the perspective from NHS Midlands, so the regional team. We had a meeting with the regional leadership on Friday of last week, and I think it was a generally positive meeting in relation to the way in which our system, our county and its health and care services have responded to the COVID incident. I think the question and the challenge was whether we could move faster in re-establishing elective services, so routine operations particularly, and also endoscopy services to make sure that our diagnostics capability as quick as possible. And I know that our teams are working very hard to do that. I think it's worth noting, though, what we want to make sure when we restart our services, that we're doing that safely. And I think we've certainly had a conversation at the Quality Governance Committee about our approach to protecting patient safety, our quality impact assessment process, which is our gateway through which our services need to pass in order to assure us at Trust Management Executive that they're restarting services safely. But we've also got aligned to that our harm review process, which is looking at whether the extended waits that have happened as a consequence of COVID-19 is creating undue or severe harm for patients. And we described that to the Midlands team and said, clearly this is a balance between getting services started as quickly as we can, whilst making sure that we're doing that safely. And I think there's a general sense of agreement with the approach, but a challenge as ever in these situations. Can we go faster?
Okay. Any other points, Julie?
Thanks for that, Matthew. And Joe, I mean, as you say, it's part one of a paper. It's mostly detailing the requirements. But as we start to ramp up again in neighbouring districts and all around us, the rate of COVID is ramping up again. So we're not a million miles from Birmingham, as you know, where the rate has gone up, I think, something like doubled in a week. So is there any modelling about how that might impact a bit further south and what that's going to mean, or whether that trend shows signs of replicated itself across the county?
Chair, I wonder if Paul could come in there, and I'm happy to provide some extra content as well.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Chair. Yes, Julie. So we've been monitoring the position in Worcester as well. And we've seen over the last rolling 4 weeks within the community confirmed cases going up 4 times as well, although the absolute numbers are small. We have quite a good early warning system, a sensitive one in place so that we can monitor movements in the community. And at the current point in time, the view is the increase in community confirmed cases is probably lagging somewhere between 15 and 16 days behind presentation to hospital. We have modelled in our work for the phase 3 recovery 2 assumptions. One is that starting from October, we could see a COVID level that returns to 50% of that we experienced in April, which was our peak. And secondly, we've modelled it at a return to the April peak, so at 100%. So we're tracking what's going on in the community. We're tracking what's going on in Birmingham, the Black Country and Herefordshire. And then we have our modelling work, which is, as I say, for the recovery on phase 3, is looking at both a 50% return to peak and 100%.
Thanks, Paul. Matthew, do you want to say anything finally about this?
Yeah, just to add to Paul's information shared. I mean, I think one of the key points for us is making sure we're very closely working with public health and general practice, so that we get our early warnings of any increase as clearly as early as possible. The health and care services across the county have in place a trigger system where if we do see outbreaks or peaks in testing and prevalence within the community, that through the emergency response arrangements that we will be provided with that information. And Chair, I know that you're involved in that directly. So I think we're reasonably well placed to be able to spot whether the impacts that are being seen in Birmingham start to come out, as they did in the first phase, because of course we know the Black Country and and parts of Sandwell within Birmingham were the early peak areas within the Midlands, just behind London. Obviously, Birmingham being Britain's second city, so or England's second city. I think the arrangements are reasonably well in place, but obviously, as ever, as a board, we'd be wanting to get our support behind the public health messages around social distancing and all of the messages the government are putting out.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think as a board, and as I guess is reflected in what the national ask is, we want it all. We want to deal with the COVID issues, but we also want to restore services to our patients as rapidly as we can, and we need to keep challenging ourselves to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to make this happen. I think the environment we're operating, the COVID environment we're operating in, the rates in Worcestershire are still quite low overall, but there has been a area. And if you think about the issues we've had over the last few days or so, it's been in Bromsgrove and Redditch where the areas have been, which tend to be the places that you have most cross flows from Birmingham in. So we need to watch that very, very carefully. We are, as some of you will know, the local authority have suspended visiting in the care homes in Bromsgrove as part of escalating the arrangements there, and we need to watch this very closely. And I think we can be assured that Paul and the team are modelling what the potential pressures on the system might be as we go forward, and that work continues. But I do think that we need to be relentless in our attempts to restore services for patients who out there have been either presenting too late or suffering with conditions that really need to be dealt with. I particularly identify people with or suspected with cancer, but there are others as well. So really important that we keep. Thank you for all of that. Let's move on then to people and culture.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up, there's 3 sections to this report. The first section is around workforce safety and the approach that we've been undertaking an individual occupational health risk assessment for all colleagues within the Trust. We have seen quite significant improvement in our compliance, as at yesterday, 96% now, with 94% for Black, Asian and minority ethnic colleagues. Of the completed forms, we've identified 25% of the workforce that have got some kind of risk to COVID, be that because they're in one of the categories of high risk, such as age or a BAME background, or they've got underlying medical conditions. And then there are a number of interventions that we put in place to mitigate those risks, which are detailed in the report, such as moving them to non-patient facing roles, etc. So that's the first part of the report. The second part of the report talks about the impact COVID's had on the absence of the organisation, sickness absence, particularly around mental health related absence. And you can see a correlation in an increase in staff numbers off with those conditions during and after the spike of wave 1 of the pandemic. We are seeing that coming back down now to near normal levels. Our normal rate is about 1% of the workforce, about 70 people. And as at yesterday, we had 74 people off with mental health related conditions. So what we've been doing is trying to proactively plan support packages for staff to support them. So the main triggers identified through occupational health have been the increase in deaths, for family members because of COVID, but also the impact of COVID in general. It has been quite surreal for people. We have to fundamentally changed the way that we work and live over the last 5 months. And so I've detailed in the report all the available support to colleagues to help them through these times. And we're also looking to identify a wellbeing guardian in line with the recommendation of the NHS People Plan, and working with a local charity, Kaleidoscope, on mental health first training for managers and colleagues, and undertaking something called Team Talk, where we focus some interventions around teams that have been particularly exposed to COVID. So, within our ICU department, for example. So quite a lot of activities going on to help address the issues that we're seeing in the organisation. And then the third part of the report is obviously quite an important part of employees' well-being, is how they feel engaged and supported by the organisation. And so we have been focusing on improving our representation, and we're still seeing success with our BAME network, which still meets weekly, and we'll be announcing the lead for that network next week following a nomination process. And we're also taking a similar approach to nominate a lead for our LGBT network, and planned a number of events to support the establishment of a disability network. So I'll stop there and take any.
Thanks. Thanks for that. Any questions, comments on those three issues? Colin.
Not particularly on those issues, David. It's a related one, if I may. I've heard reports from other organisations of instances where staff who are, for various reasons, working at home for long periods of time, experiencing difficulties, getting the feeling of isolation and being disconnected with the organisation. I wondered if we have any instances of that here.
What we've done, Colin, right from the beginning, is to schedule weekly welfare calls with all those working from home. Initially, that was undertaken by the HR team, but we've now transferred that back to line management in July. And so that's part of the regular overview of welfare calls. So both those that are off sick, but also those who are working from home. And obviously we encourage line managers to continue with their regular one-to-one and team meetings through virtual approach. So we're not seeing any particular trends in that at the moment, but something that we're keeping an eye on.
Any other questions? Anita?
Thank you, Chair. Tina, I just wondered, obviously in the last sort of 48 hours or longer, we are starting to get indications that we are going to get a second spike, or it's coming. Given that we know that there was a significant strain on our people during the first spike, I wondered if you had a gut feel as to the state of resilience of people, because I think this is quite a critical moment, because this is where people start to fear what's coming, and I'm just wondering whether your business partners have got a sense of how resilient people are feeling, how difficult the next almost the next month before it actually hits could almost be very critical, I think.
You're right, it is a worry, because we are getting feedback that people are tired. So it's going through the first wave, but then now responding to the restoration phase. So trying to play a bit of catch up, plus also being mindful of a potential second or third wave. So we have got the Task and Finish group, where we've got representation from all staff groups across the trust, just to get a test each week, feedback on how it's feeling. And that's what's helped inform the interventions that we've put in place. So, we think we've done everything, doing everything we can do to help people with their resilience going forward. And obviously we're monitoring a number of indicators just to if there's particular pockets of staff or areas where we need to put additional support in place.
Okay, thanks.
David, can I just add a couple of points to Anita's question, which I think is really important. I mean, one of the things that we've had in place is a number of open staff sessions with me both in the virtual kind of world of meet the chief executive sessions, but also I've been keeping very close contact with a group of frontline staff who work in various different parts of the organisation, who certainly in the early periods were describing, the real stress that staff were under. That I think has shifted, particularly since people have been able to have some time off. But that doesn't mean that we should be complacent. And I wonder whether, Chair, if I can ask Richard to just give a quick description of the staff app that is about to be implemented, which we're going to whilst apps are not the panacea to all evils, it's another channel that we're able to put in place to enable our staff to basically connect with each other as much as actually connect with the corporate voice to share their concerns. So Richard, perhaps a couple of points on that would be helpful.
Yes.
Sorry, Richard, go on.
Yeah, sorry, we're aiming for hopefully go live next month with the staff. What drove it initially was our need to find a replacement for full checkpoints so that we could do regular, easily accessible a fairly adaptable platform where we can reach out to selected staff groups for, I guess, what you could call a temperature check of mood and morale, either in particular departments or across particular staff groups or across the whole trust. So that will provide us with a fairly rapid turnaround of results as a kind of outline and an early warning of areas where there might particularly be issues developing. And my hope is that we can also work with the divisions so that they can do some tailored engagement with their own staff during particular challenging periods using the app. So it's an as well as rather than instead of, as Matthew said, it will give us a quicker and more immediate access to data than things like the staff opinion survey might do.
Richard, can I just say, some of your sound wasn't brilliant as you were doing.
Sorry.
People, I got the sense of what you were saying. It's just that if just in future, just be careful about that. I mean, it's so any other questions, any other comments in relation to that before I try? It's always just on this. I mean, there is no doubt, and if you look at right the way through the COVID episodes, that this organisation put a lot of support in place for people across the board, a lot of support, a tremendous amount, in fact, and all credit to Tina and the team for all that they did. The issue with all of these things, though, is does anybody know about it? And that's the kind of crucial thing, I think, in relation to all of this. It's great having loads of support, but if nobody knows how to access it or how to, and I know people a lot of effort in doing that, but I don't think we can ever do enough. So more. I'd encourage you more and more communication about this stuff that's available and that supports people. And just on the mental health issue, I think we may have 70 odd people off sick, but they're in a sense of the tip of the iceberg or whatever it is. There's quite a lot of mental ill health work is so important in all of this, and it's crucial to do this is the line managers and what they do. So making sure that we support them, I think, is going to be very important as we go forward. And the final thing I would say, apps are great. I don't know whether we should call you now Matt the app, Matthew, but they're great as long as they work and they're delivered on time. I noticed Richard was relatively vague about the timing of the app coming on stream, which I think is very sensible at the moment until we get it absolutely right. But I think that will be a really good part of taking all of this forward. On the points in the paper, I think the progress that's been made in relation to risk assessments is very good. I think the team have really worked hard to make this happen. So thanks to the team for for putting the effort into all of this to make sure we've done people. And in particular, good results. It's only part of the job, the risk assessment. We need to do something about it. But nevertheless, I think as an indicator of our ability to get hold of something and do them, I think is extremely good. Well done about all of that. The overall issues in relation to workforce and sickness absence, as you can see, the amount of work that people are putting into this, the critical bit for me is to make sure that it's well understood and communicated out. And the staff networks are an important part of this. I mean, it's quite an interesting comment, isn't it? You know, 18 months ago, people said to us that you couldn't get networks operating in this organisation. People weren't interested in coming together to do things. Well, I think you, Tina, and the team have proved everyone wrong in relation to that. It's a very important set of processes here, which will strengthen our ability. It won't always make it easy for us at a board level, and I have no doubt we're going to get the place for the organisation to be in. So thanks for all of that. Now, we're going to have a break now for 10 minutes to refresh ourselves, or whatever the right word is. I make it, if we come back here at 11:15, if you can whip yourselves up into a sense of excitement for the integrated performance report, that would be great. Thank you. See you in 10 minutes.
Oh, lovely, please. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right, I'm now connected to this. So that's better. Yeah, great. Thank you. Oh. Hi, Tracy.
Oh, is that Matthew?
It is. God, that was a big sigh. You're right. Oh, have you? Right. Oh, can you? Oh, yeah.
Matthew, you're not on mute.
I see Fleur Blakeman on here somewhere? Did I see her?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I was just munching.
You're eating. Oh, sorry. Well, you obviously appeared, so welcome. Anyway, I missed you at the beginning.
Thank you, David. Sorry.
Right, let's make a start. I hope we're all refreshed and raring to go. And for those of you who forgot to turn off their microphones, you continued apparently to pronounce over YouTube while we're off. So anyway, with that in mind, if we should move on to the integrated performance report. Now, the report as it's set out here has a front sheet in relation to most of the activities. It also has another front sheet in relation to quality, and also takes in finance. So what I want to do is at the beginning to identify all those things we want to talk about from all three of those areas. So Vicky, when you're introducing this, can you bear that in mind? I want to have an integrated conversation rather than one which kind of goes through each individually. Okay?
David.
For all yours, Vicky. Or is Matthew going to introduce it, or are you going to go straight on, Vicky?
Plow on, and then Matthew can jump in and help us as required. Thank you. So thank you very much, colleagues. So this is the integrated performance report that is for the July validated position. As David's already identified, it feels a very different format of report this time. We're using this as a transitional month. To take into account feedback that has been generated via the various subcommittees of the board. And it also pulls into the new format, which you can see under the operational performance section, best practice features from elsewhere. So certainly looking out towards the organisations of similar size, and just really trying to refine and evolve and just finesse our approach around integrated performance. There is a second cover sheet, as David has already identified, under the quality section. However, that moving forward, that will not be the case. We're hoping to be able to adopt the operational performance standard format throughout this report to give a better view and answer that question that I think colleagues have raised on a number of occasions, which is and so what? So particularly when we get into the operational section, you'll still see the use of the SPC charts. We still feel that they offer very good value and give some theme and trends as we go across. And then page 36 in the pack actually gives you a view of what that new format looks like of performance indicators. Then there's some narrative in terms of, so what is the data telling us? And then underneath there, some benchmarking information. So really hoping that that starts to kind of give a more triangulated view around different aspects of our performance and moves on that performance and that integrated performance conversation as we go through. I'll just pause there in case there are any questions around that particular format or section. No? Matthew, I don't know if you wanted to add anything at that point, or should I just carry on?
No, I don't think so, Vicky. I think you've explained it really well.
Thank you very much. So in terms of the challenges that are identified in this report, the three main areas in terms of operational performance, which we touched on under Joe's paper, is the recovery of services piece and how all of that is going to knit together, the emergency access standard and those underpinning indicators around 12-hour trolley waits, and the time to speciality review and ambulance handover, and also picks up those Home First Worcestershire Board and KPIs as well. And then in the elective programme during those months of COVID, that bulge of referrals and that waiting list growth, and how are we going to manage that? Under the quality section, we've identified the sepsis challenge, which I know has been a subject of discussion at the quality and safety subcommittee for a number of months, and Mike and Vicky will talk at some length about those challenges around that particular thing, though our mortality review data is actually in a very good position. And then we'll come through to finance and the productivity and efficiency challenge, but also in terms of that PBR suspension, what it means for us in terms of a block contract and moving through into the next part of this financial year. So if I pause there and ask if maybe Matthew and then move to Paul, if that's all right, Chair.
Fine, yeah. Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So, and thanks, Vicky. I mean, I think the elements of the performance report that reference the phase 3 preparation and transition are we've touched on earlier in the meeting, but it remains the case that we are very focused on working with system partners to ensure there's a properly integrated approach to address the 3 main pillars of the requirement that was set out in the national team's letter of the 31st of July, which, as stated here, not losing ground on the progress that's been made over the last 6 months in relation to improving our ambulance handover delay performance and our aggregated patient wait in our emergency departments, whilst at the same time maintaining capacity for an expected second peak. So you'll have heard previously, we have retained parts of our hospitals that have previously been used for urgent care. Our ambulatory emergency care unit, particularly on the Worcester site, still set aside for potential COVID patients. So making sure that we're in a good position in relation to that, whilst being absolutely focused on compliance with infection control practices. And as we said earlier, this is a complex set of requirements to put in place. It was a lot easier to stop services than it is to restart them. And I was only yesterday talking to the clinical director for anaesthetics and theatres, who was describing her absolute passion to move forward as quickly as possible, but a real sense of the need to get it right so that there isn't a reversal and therefore a further adverse impact going forward. So if with those comments, Chair, I'll pass to Paul to just give perhaps 1 or 2 headlines from the July performance and perhaps then a quick outline on what's coming next.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Chairman. I mean, I think just on the 3 bullet points of the main challenges, obviously that's a moving feast as things change after the paper's been written. And just so board members are aware, on bullet point 2, where we currently identify that 10% of our beds remain out of play, that number is now 4% as the activity continues to ramp up. But I'll focus my kind of key comments on the July position, as that's what this paper relates to. And I'll cover urgent care, elective cancer and diagnostic, but I'll do it pretty quickly. So on urgent care, if you look at the overall performance for the Trust against the 4-hour standard for July, then that was 92.6%. If you compare that to the position in July last year, then that position was 76.32%. So it shows an improvement of 16%. I think that improvement though is greater than it seems, because the number of patients who were going through the minor injuries unit last year were much greater than those this year. And if you just look at the type 1 performance, so that going through our 2 ED departments, that if you look in the paper, performance this year was 90.16 in July compared to 64.02% last year. So in terms of the EDs, that represents a 26% performance improvement. In relation to the other core standards, this year in July, we had no 12-hour breaches. Last year it was 61. And this year we've had 13 1-hour ambulance handover breaches. And last July it was 386. So on the key performance measures, you can see significant improvements from the teams across all indicators. I would add as well, if you look at the ambulance conveyancing, you'll see this year we had 4,667 conveyances in June compared to 4,715 last July, sorry, not June. So you can see that ambulance conveyancing numbers are virtually at pre-COVID levels now. And those headline numbers for the Trust slightly disguise the fact that at Worcester, they are now above pre-COVID levels, and at Alex, they're tracking slightly below. However, on the other side of the coin, obviously because we closed down a lot of services, if we look at the number of patients waiting over 52 weeks, this time for July this month, it was 483. This time last year, it was 4. But conversely, the overall waiting list for July this year stands at 36,384 compared to 37,336 last year. So the waiting list has reduced, but I think we mustn't take any false sense of security for that, because that's more about a reduction in referrals over the period rather than us treating more patients. And again, not so good a story on cancer as well. The 62 to 103 day waits this year were 152 this July compared to 137 last year. But the 104 day plus waits this July were 161 compared to 36 last year. And then just finishing with the diagnostic list, because we've had a major closures on MRI, CT and endoscopy, the waiting list, the diagnostic waiting list currently stands at 12,206 compared to 6,544 last year. So I bring those, that's the performance. I bring those comparative figures in linked to bullet point 1. I know we'll cover in more detail in the private section of the board later today, but I think the 52-week waits, the cancer waits and the diagnostic growth in the waiting list demonstrates that we have a major challenge to restore all services to 100% of last year. And what we also need to bear in mind is that if we restore to 100% of last year's activity levels, that puts us, that's not an output, that's an input, and 100% will not deliver the reductions in those backlogs that have built up. And from the work that we've done today, my kind of estimate that in relation to bullet point 1 as the top 3 areas of challenge, to actually bring us back to last year's position in outputs rather than inputs. So no one waiting over 52 weeks, no one waiting over 104 days for cancer, and a DMO1, a diagnostic performance of 1% waiting over 6 weeks. On average, across those indicators, we would need to be running at 160% of last year's activity levels. So I'll stop there, Chairman, but those are the key points for the position in July.
Paul, I'm sorry. I think we're having problems with sound, or I'm having problems with sound everywhere. That there sometimes we're missing bits, and we always seem to miss the bits that are the most important. And I missed the bit towards the end of what you were saying when you started to say that in order to get back to the overall position we needed to be at, we had to do something. So can you just explain that last bit again? The very last bit.
Sorry, Chairman. What I was saying was that the NHS EI ask is an input. It's to get back to 100% of activity. That, for me, the bigger issue or more important issue is the output. How do we get back to a position where we have no 104-day waits for cancer? How do we get back to the position where we have no one waiting over 52 weeks for surgery, and get back to a 1% position for diagnostic performance? And my estimate at this stage is to achieve that, our activity levels would have to run around about 160% of last year's level.
Thanks for that. Any questions or comments on all of that? Julie?
So the question is, Paul, what is the maximum we can run at if it's not 160? What is it and how are we doing it?
So the work at the moment indicates across the main surface areas that we can get to about 100% for CT, about 70% for MRI, about 64% for endoscopy, about 87% for day case, and about 30% for inpatient activity from the work that we've done to date. The main challenges, so let me give PPE and national guidance on endoscopy means that we're currently running at roughly 50% of the throughput per list than we were pre-COVID. If you look at theatres for inpatient surgery, we're currently averaging 1.2 cases per theatre session. Pre-COVID, that was 2.4. So the big issue is predominantly around the ability to get the same number of patients through the facilities that we were previously. There is also a workforce issue, which we mustn't underestimate. In terms of facilities, then at the moment, we have now got all our endoscopy units open, our CT and MRI units are all open, and in terms of our operating theatres, we have 5 of the 8 open at Worcester, and we'll be opening a 6 in 2 weeks' time. We have now got 4 of the 6 operating theatres open at the Alex, and we've got 3 of the 4 operating theatres open at Kidderminster. So we're bringing all the facilities back online. It's a productivity and to an extent a workforce issue. And we're now looking at other opportunities to increase our activity levels. I think the area that's probably the number one for us to watch on, because it impacts across the board, is endoscopy.
Julie, does that answer your question, or does it just raise a set of other ones?
Well, it mostly answers it, because I was wondering if it's a physical environment thing, with the increased distancing and that. But when you said PPE, so that's a different issue, because I was going to ask about extended hours, but we've also got a workforce issue, and we're using everything we can then, because physical capacity, you can't expand the walls, but you can expand the hours you use it. But if we've got a PPE issue and we have a staffing issue, then that probably goes against that, does it, Paul?
Yes, at the moment. So, for example, one of the things that we're looking at is we can't combine the same facility for endoscopy, for ambulatory endoscopy and inpatient endoscopy. So we're looking at, given that we've got 2 theatres available at Worcester, whether we could move the inpatient endoscopy into the theatres, which would then release the endoscopy rooms and endoscopy recovery, and use that for ambulatory. That would give us an extra 10 sessions. So we're working through how we can create the extra capacity, but then we've got to work through, okay, then how can we staff those extra 10 sessions? Because we don't have endoscopy nurses and gastro nurses, consultants just lying around. But what we have done is we've identified that we can bring in a couple of extra IBD nurses, and they would release out of the job plans 5 sessions for the gastroenterologist, which we could then transfer into the endoscopy unit. So we're having to be, we got to think kind of quite broadly about how we manage the workforce and the facilities that we have to get the best out of it. But endoscopy, from my perspective, remains a real big challenge.
Yes, I've got Mike, Mark, and Vicky to go. Mike.
No, I think Paul's covered it off, so I won't.
All right. Okay. Mark.
If I listened and understood what Paul was saying correctly, this can only get worse. Regardless of everything that Paul just said he can try and do, if we're running at those percentages and we need to then run at 160% in July to catch up, then obviously July, August, etc. isn't going to be at 100%. Therefore, that 160% gets worse and worse and worse. So I'm looking at this thinking, I don't see a way that this improves, and it's a spiral down without any hope of it improving, which I'm sat here rather despondent would be the best I could come up with. Is my analysis correct, Paul?
I mean, I think in terms of the diagnostic and elective activity, we need to recognise that we haven't done any routine work for 5.5 months. So that's what we're trying to catch up on. I'm not quite as despondent as you, because we're trying out, like that endoscopy example, different ways of trying to deliver improved volumes. We're also finding that on cancer, for example, now that we're doing consultant-led triage on all GP referrals, one of the things that's beginning to emerge is that the number of patients that we're having to see face-to-face is reducing quite dramatically, because the virtual triage is actually identifying that patients referred on that 2-week pathway actually are not at risk of cancer and can be discharged. So there's a whole host of different ways of interacting with patients that we're using to try and, it's not so much increasing the activity, but it's to reduce the burden so that we can concentrate on the areas that we really need to. And for me, I think number one, and I would hope all the board would agree, number one is eliminating the 104-day plus waits for cancer, and then getting back down to a minimum 62-day waits. And then secondly, it's getting that endoscopy, that diagnostic capacity back to high levels, because that's in part how we're actually picking up issues, whilst at the same time maintaining all our emergency surgery and category 2 complex surgery and cancer work. So I understand where you're coming from, Mark, but we're still working on it to try and find different ways of bringing online activity or releasing consultant time, so it's focused on the most important areas rather than seeing patients that have been referred, but actually they don't need to be seen.
I think, Mark, that not wishing to kind of chase headlines and all of this, fundamentally from the point of view of the board and the population, what we really need to know is when will we start making inroads into the backlog? And when will we complete the work on the backlog? I think it's just a bit too early. Sure. And then the kind of the question that comes after that then is, so what can we do to make it all work faster? And that may be a resource issue, it may be working practices, all the rest of it. And I think Mark and the team are working hard on all of that to make sure that we get into that. But it is undoubtedly a major mountain to climb for the NHS nationally, never mind in Worcestershire. Okay, Vicky, I think you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment in addition to what Paul said, because as well as looking at maximising the capacity, it's about how we give confidence for patients about their safety in terms of infection control practice. So to Julie's point, there are no PPE constraints. The issue is managing very clear pathways agreed in terms of best practice. Mike and myself, in chairing the quality impact assessment process, are working with Paul to maximise the capacity to make sure that all of the practices and pathways for infection control are followed, but there are no issues with PPE, to emphasise that point.
You mean there's no issues in terms of supply of PPE?
Yes, sorry, yes, in terms of procurement supply of PPE and practices, because we're very clearly monitoring adherence to required practices. And
so, Chair, what I meant by PPE in responding to Julie is the IPC requirements mean that we can't see as many patients in a session that we used to be able to do pre-COVID. It's not about the supply of it; it's the consequence of it.
Okay, let's kind of let's move on. We need to consider so in terms of the emergency access and the rest of it, Paul. You know, the question that immediately comes to mind is this improvement real and sustainable? Or is it a response to all the other changes that we've had in stopping work across the system? What's your answer to that?
So, Chairman, the question is what we're doing at the moment sustainable going forward into the winter?
Yeah. I mean, for us, we've obviously made significant progress, and the numbers reflect it, and that's fantastic for patients and the rest of it. The issue for me is whether this is an artifact because we've stopped doing everything else, or does it really reflect sustainable going forward?
I think the changes that I've identified, we're bringing online the theatre capacity and what we're doing with things like endoscopy CT is sustainable. I mean, Kidderminster is functioning.
Sorry, Paul, I'm talking about the urgent and emergency care progress.
We have to be clear that we are facing an increased challenge. The volumes of activity are growing significantly in what we've seen in the first week of September. We sustained the position across urgent care in August, but September so far has been more challenging, and we've got a real focus on that because we have not achieved the level of discharges by 12 o'clock each day that we were achieving in the previous 5 months. So I think it is sustainable, but it needs a lot of focus on it. It's not that improvement is not embedded yet. So there is more work to do on that.
Okay, Matthew.
Yeah, just to agree with Paul's point, I think the answer is if all of the parts of the system are working as well as they have done over the 6 months up until middle to the end of August, then yes, it is sustainable. We'll see a bit of variability, but the variability that we've seen this last week has been as a consequence of the processes and policies that have been put in place across the system not being as embedded as they need to be. We need to get that sorted as quickly as possible. So I think to add to Paul's point, if we've got all parts of the system working in the way in which they need to, putting patients first rather than organisations first, I think we'll see a better sustainability and less variability.
Right. Okay. Can I move on to the issue that was raised in relation to quality, which is sepsis? What's the latest position on it, and what are we doing to improve our performance? Who wants to answer this?
Shall I come in on that?
Yes, Mike.
Yeah. So clearly, over the period of COVID, we lost some of the support from the sepsis team because They were all ITU based. They're now back and active. I think our reports are more accurate than they were because we've now got a barcode within the sepsis form that allows us to pick all the forms out. If we look at some of the metrics around the quality of care we're delivering antibiotics within an hour in 97% of patients. Our sepsis mortality is 102, which is within the standard parameters. What we're letting ourselves down on is recording the data on the sepsis 6 in a reliable way. So at present, we're doing an audit. So the medical director for Sunrise is working the ED, some shifts, and he wants to do an audit, and they are focusing on sepsis between Mike McAlinden, our lead, and him to review that for 2 reasons, really. One is to work out, is there apparent lack of compliance because we're just not recording, or is it something we're not doing properly? So we'll have greater clarity about that. But also it will help us to design a system as we roll Sunrise out across the organisation that enables us to further chase down the numbers. So while the sepsis 6 doesn't look good, our delivery of the core components of antibiotics, oxygen and fluids are all in the high 90s. And so while I agree it's where area we've got to continue to focus, I think the board can be reassured that patients are safe as a consequence of those parameters. So I hope that's helpful. I'm happy to take any questions on it.
Any comments on that? I mean, the only thing I would say, Mike, is that, questions about data, comments about we do the bits of the sepsis 6 that works and we're not so good at that are really important and less good at the other ones, have been comments that have been made for several, if not years, here. And, my conclusions at the end. Is there any other points or comments that people want to make? Okay, on the money, I think you've not raised anything particularly in relation to the money, and which is I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing. The question, and it just seems, and they're looking at the numbers, as far as I can gather, we're doing okay. However, we have underlying here a great big deficit. And what I can't work out from any of it is whether we're we're going forwards or backwards, really, about whether we should be more optimistic about the financial future or less. And I just wondered, Robert, whether you want to say anything about that.
No, Chairman, I think excellent points. And as you know, this is very complex at the minute to understand our position, particularly whilst we are, as we can see from the finance report, certainly in July, of our total income, if you use PBR, we were at about 71% of the income we would normally have expected was actually through activity, where year to date was 60%. So we are increasing our activity. And in the old world, obviously that means we would have been increasing our income. But the real challenge is actually understanding our baseline, particularly as Paul's made the points. It's a different level of activity that we're now providing, with all of the implications of the use of PPE actually taking us longer to do things. What we have to do is to, I think, over the next few months, as we'd be doing, we're trying to really understand the new baseline that we can work to, and actually see that actually as we provide additional activity, are we doing that at a better marginal cost, if that makes sense? So are we getting more activity for the same resources? So it's a real challenge at the minute. We haven't been spending certainly as we would have expected to plan, but I think a lot of that is the benefits from not having agency staff and managing to work within our own resources. That clearly, as we increase our activity, we're going to have to make sure we understand the rotas and the workforce that we're using, and to make sure we do that as effectively as possible. I think that's the biggest challenge we have at the minute, Chairman.
Yeah, I still feel to an extent And I understand the complexity of it, but I do think that we seem to be, who's here from the Finance and Performance Committee? Who's there? From the
David.
Steve, you must have gone underneath all of this in a bit more.
We've tried. I think the underlying issue is without PBR, we don't really have. I don't think we have a dashboard for finance at the moment. We really are not able to work out whether we're productive or not. And I suppose the obvious picture at the moment is our use of resources is worse now than it has been, in the sense of our cost base is almost in line with what it was, but our deliverables are far lower. Now that's a COVID issue. So, but I would say that so one issue is there is an underlying problem. I don't think we're getting better at dealing with it at the moment. But the big issue is I don't think we have the dashboard, the tool, information to enable us to assess anywhere, even below at hospital level and certainly below total hospital level, where we're being more productive, where we're being less productive. And I know Rob and his team are working on this, but we don't have that at the moment. And I think that's very worrying. We're covered at the moment because of the block contract approach. But actually, as you know, when we lose that safety blanket and we actually measured on how well we're using our resources, I think we could find we don't look too good. And I would say in the short term, I think the urgency is for us to look at, is really have our finance, HR, operations, and our working together to look at least monitoring our headcount and how well we use our people. Because obviously that's our key driver. If we manage that well, then that would be a big contributor. And I guess what I'm skeptical about is our reliance too much on controls over recruitment. We have to have those controls, but we need more than that. It's a bit of a blunderbuss. I think we need to work out which are areas actually do we have our ratios of staff to outputs right, and which areas we don't have it right. So we're very focused on where we need to be, much more firm with our divisional directors and our clinical directors in helping them work out how they can improve their productivity. So I suppose I'm giving a bit of a bleak message, but I think at the moment we're in a difficult situation of we're not really monitoring at a granular enough level how well we're using our resources, which means it's hard for us to target where we can get that performance and productivity improvement that we really do need.
Can I just ask Steve on that, and Robert can join if you want. You said that our cost base is the same as it was. It's not changed.
It's very close.
Is that after you've stripped out any extra costs associated with COVID?
Well, I think if we take account of COVID, there's been a reduction, but it's relatively small with our very large fall in income. So I would not. We can't. Yeah, that we have managed reduced agency staff. There have been specific improvements, but if you're looking around, that's nowhere near commensurate with the drop in the activity within the hospital.
So our cost base is lower than anybody expected, I think, at this time of year, and particularly even in light with the financial framework we've got. We're one of the few trusts that is actually spending below expectations. So that's a positive position. But as Stephen said, that drop in itself, if you look in isolation, doesn't compensate for what you'd argue would be a significant drop in activity revenue if you use PBR. Just on the points that Steve made, though, David, is, and Vicky's got her team working on it. We have got a restoration balance scorecard that we are trying to use to actually make sure we're matching up the workforce, the activity, and the finance costs. So we are really focused on the expenditure side as opposed to income, because clearly income is a very different ballgame this year. So it's not that we are working on that and seeing what we can do, and that's a critical piece of work at the minute, because obviously it is key. And Matthew's had his hand up a couple of times. I'll have to pass over there.
Yeah, okay. I'm just trying to I mean, I don't want to extend this because obviously the subcommittee need to get underneath this, not least of all to give us a really, you know, for me, an understandable position. That is our management of resources getting worse, better, or staying the same. And it's as hard into a new financial environment next year, not really having a grip on what we're doing now. It's just going to be, you know, we're just going to revisit a whole load of things that we've had to do in the past. So can I mean, I want to move on now in terms of all this. Do you want to say something finally about this, Matthew?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I think in wrapping up this section, I think the piece that from the finance element is absolutely, as we point out, are we getting better, the same or worse? And whilst it's a bit more of a complicated environment, there are some indicators that we can, if we properly integrate between workforce, finance and operations, give some better clarity than I think we've been able to over the first part of this year. And that's why I've tasked, as Stephen said, Paul, Tina and Robert to bring to the table more of an integrated picture than just the workforce element in isolation or the finance element in isolation. So we can really understand how the 70% of our expenditure, which is on our staff, is being used, and try and better present the productivity of the organisation, how that is aligned with the quality and the complexity of operating in a COVID environment. But I think more broadly, in summary, I think there are elements of the integrated performance report that are going in the right direction, and I think what we need to do is be able to make that as clear as possible for the board, where things are improving, but also making sure that we spend time on focusing on those areas that are of greatest concern or greatest risk. And I think we've done that today in relation to the waiting times and the likely increase. But clearly what we've got to be able to articulate is how we're going to address some of those big issues from a patient safety or a financial perspective. So I think things are moving in the right direction steadily, and clearly we've absolutely got to make sure that we're well sighted to manage our risks as they develop over this next 6 months of the year.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Just to kind of summarise all of this, I think the three things that were identified at the beginning are three of the right things. We'll have an opportunity later to talk a bit more about the recovery of services, but I think Paul has really adequately, well painted a kind of scale of the mountain that we need to climb in relation to all of this. There are no quick fixes, I think, in relation to this, but the quicker we can get a handle on what the timetable and what the things that we can bring forward to move this forward is obviously really, really important. The stuff on emergency access, the numbers look good. I think in a board report here, which is great, and I think the people have done a fantastic job taking things forward. I think the work that's been done at the Alex in relation to the way they changed the pathway has significantly improved things. We just need to make sure that this stuff is sustainable. There is still a lot that we can do ourselves to make this better. There are obviously some system issues that need to be tackled as well, and they need to be tackled robustly, and we'll that work with David and the other people to enable that to happen. So that's, I think, important, and to make sure that the patients who are waiting for care, we've got a good handle on how they are and whether we need to do something about that. In relation to quality, I think that there are significant improvements across the piece and all of that, which is really good to see. Sepsis is an obvious example, and I think we need to think about how we might have a more in-depth discussion at the board about what's happening here at a time that Mike thinks is suitable, and we've got some better data. with the people. And on the financial position, I think as soon as we can, hopefully for the next meeting, Robert, we'll have a kind of an answer to those questions about the cost base, about whether we're making improvements or whether we're deteriorating. I think will help us do that. Okay, well, thanks very much for all of that. Let's move on then to an important issue that we have considered on a number of occasions here, which is infection control. And I think Vicky, and welcome Tracy, who's just appeared as if by magic to us. I think, are you just going to start off, Vicky, and then Tracy's going to give it to us straight? Is that right?
She will give it to us straight indeed, yes, she will. So this is just introducing us because this was a requirement during COVID. The work that we were doing, that nationally they set out standards that they put in a framework of a board assurance framework. So it's important that it comes to the board for a level of assurance, but Tracy's going to talk us through in an overview the process that she has undertaken in order to provide that proposition to the board today. So I'll hand over to Tracy.
Thank you, Vicky. Can I just check my sound's working okay?
Yes, we
super.
You.
Thank you.
See you.
Yeah, so thank you. So it's really great to be able to present this to the board. So thank you for inviting me. The board assurance framework for COVID was issued back in May, and we've undertaken a very detailed self-assessment and mapping exercise of the evidence we have to be able to evidence for assurance and then assess a level of assurance. So having undertaken that work, that was presented to the Trust Infection Prevention and Control Committee, and we had a very detailed review and scrutiny and recommended levels of assurance. That then was reviewed and critiqued by CGG, was then subsequently discussed again in detail at TME, and TME then approved those levels of assurance. QGC then discussed, again, looked in detail and confirmed they were assured both by the levels of assurance, but also the actions that we were able to report that we were taking to further increase our assurance and drive improvement. The other process that's gone on, just for the board to be aware, is the CQC have issued a framework for themselves to review trust processes in terms of the way we're assuring ourselves with the BAF. And myself and Vicky met with CQC to discuss the detail of the process and the assurances we had. So as you can see in the report, overall, we have assessed our assurance as a level 6 for the COVID BAF, and that's of 7 levels. So that's a very strong level of assurance overall. The issue, just to flag to board, that board will have read, is the level 3 assurance for antimicrobial stewardship. Now, sort of looking at that, that seems one of concern, but the thing to be very cited on, I think, is we're really in the vanguard of trust in terms of using the levels of assurance framework. And what that's done is provided a much more granular level of detail as part of the assurance assessment work. So a level 3 does not mean we're an outlier with other organisations by any means. What using the process has done, it's enabled us to really draw out the need for additional focused work around antimicrobial stewardship in order to make sure we've got the same strength of assurance as we have for the other criterion. So the paper sets out a summary of the actions we're taking in relation to antimicrobial stewardship. And I'm really pleased actually to be able to just update the board that we're seeing really strong clinical engagement around stewardship and already some really quite tangible progress that I'll obviously share in detail with TME and QGC at the next series of meetings. So I'll stop there, Chair, and take any questions. I'm sure there will be some.
Thanks for that, Tracy. Can I just ask, I mean, from my perspective, one of the things about this whole set of issues around infection control, it's kind of bounced around a bit. It suddenly got better, then it got worse, then it got better, then it got worse. And I was never quite sure in those circumstances whether that's to do with measurement or whether to do with our inability to embed some of these things in the work that we do. Where do you think we are in all of that now?
Where do I think we are?
Is it sustainable?
The short answer is yes, it is sustainable. We are seeing so many other examples, if I think outside the COVID specific work. So the work on Clostridium difficile, we've moved over the last couple of years to a position where our divisions are really, really understanding their issues. They're actively reviewing whenever we get a patient who develops C. difficile in hospital. They're sharing the learning. We're seeing some really tangible examples of that shared learning and that action to make a difference. And that just wasn't there a few years ago. So we're not, absolutely where we want to be, which is leading edge and benchmarking with the very best. But we are certainly moved towards that. And yes, I do believe it's sustainable. I think COVID has actually helped support that, because there's certainly nobody in the organisation anywhere who is not aware of all the basic infection prevention and control messages, training, etc. now. We've still got some hills to climb, but we have made really good progress.
Okay, very good. Any other questions, comments? Well, we can't let her off that easily, surely. Okay. That's really good to good to hear, and I think the issues that you've described, the antimicrobial stewardship stuff, you say that there's some positive signs in the engagement of people, which I think is always a good thing and something we haven't always got, I think, in relation to the organisation. So that looks really good to me. So, sorry, Vicky, you wanted to say something?
I think I just wanted to come in because I think some of the foundations that Tracy's established since she's been in role are really key to the engagement process with the divisions, because I think actually what we're getting to the outcomes, because the engagement when we've had challenges, or we've had a cluster of infections, the Tracy's developed has been a key conduit to some of the levels of assurance that Tracy's outlined. But I think importantly, Tracy's taken up the interim DIPSI role, which is important for the board to know, because we've got that clinical expertise and leadership to keep us focused to make sure that we can sustain the improvements to David, and so that we can continue the improvement, which is really important.
How long have you been doing this now, Tracy, this role?
The DIPSI role or infection prevention?
Infection prevention here.
Oh, here since January 2019. I've been in infection prevention for well over 20 years.
Yeah, I know you have. Well, that's great. I absolutely take the point there. I think there's good progress here. I think solid progress, which seems to be sustainable, which I think that's great. And so we're happy to get the right to approve this document and the assessment that it makes. It's been through QGC already. And can I just thank you, Tracy, for the sterling work that you've done since you've taken this on. I can certainly sleep better at night knowing you're leading all of this this sort of stuff. So on behalf of all of the board, thank you very much for the work that you've done in this really important. To the Trust Management Executive, Chief Executive, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll take the paper as read, Chair. I think the meetings continue to focus on, I think, the key business of the organisation. You'll see, and non-exec colleagues will see the reports. Will be familiar with some of the papers then come on to the various assurance committees. What we have trialled, which I think I mentioned at a previous board, giving the members of the committee dedicated reading time to be able to go through the papers, and I think that is starting to enable a more more active conversation. I really get the sense that our clinical leaders are leading the discussion, which is, I think, where we want to be. One of the other things, Chair, that I'm just making sure this month that we do is do a look back formally through Trust Management Executive of any recent reviews that we've had of our services or our ways of working. For example, the review we had last summer of our data and our information reporting, the review we had of our mortality processes, and just making sure that we've completed all of the recommendations of each of those reviews. So from an executive perspective, I'm properly assured that we have completed the recommendations and can be assured that those external reviews and the impact they have on patient safety or productivity or the finances of the organisation are complete. I'll report on that probably in the November meeting.
Thank you very much for that. Can we then move on to the Audit and Assurance Committee report, including we've got here the annual report. Steve.
Thank you, David. I won't say too much. I think the reports are reasonably self-explanatory. It's worth saying, I think, in the Audit Committee meeting, we were very pleased to see that despite COVID, we still seem to be making progress on the areas which are covered by the committee. Particularly very pleased with the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, which has really got some traction now with Melanie, our new Guardian Melanie. So I think we were as a committee we were pleased with the progress which the Trust is making on those areas we were looking at. So unless there are any specific questions, I wouldn't propose to say more on that.
Okay. Any questions, comments? We note the report.
Okay. Excuse me.
To the blood and blood product supply contract.
We come on to that this afternoon, David.
Sorry?
This one's here, Steve.
Okay.
Shall I take this one, Chairman?
Sure.
Yeah. Blood and blood product supply contract.
Yeah, Chairman, this is quite a simple contract. We basically the Blood and Transport Service is a monopoly supplier to us, but as part of our ongoing financial governance in terms of non-purchase order, non-pay, because of the size of the contract, which is within our budget and within the amounts that we expect to spend, it's just important that £2.1 million that the board actually have oversight as we enter into these sorts of contracts. So that's the reason that's been brought here in public, just to make sure that we're following our updated standing financial instructions, which for any amount over £500,000 on expenditure in a contract should come to the Trust Board for approval after it's been through the various Trust Management Executive and Finance and Planning.
Okay. Any comments, questions? No? Okay, approved. Thank you. Standing financial instructions and scheme of delegation. Is this you, Robert?
Yes, it is, Chairman. So these are, apologies, these are, we've agreed, I think, with the Audit Committee that we will regularly and consistently keep these up to date. So they are minor changes and just slight improvements. There's nothing significant in terms of changes to the SFIs, but obviously they require a Trust Board endorsement as well, Chairman. So that's what
they've been through the Audit Committee?
Yes, they have.
Been through the Audit Committee, yeah. Anything you want to say about them, Steve?
No, the changes are relatively minor, but we're just pleased that it just shows we're keeping them up to date.
Okay, very good. We're approved. Yes, thank you. Standing order.
Thank you, Chairman. That's me. This is a report that the updated standing orders, same as the SFIs and scheme of delegation. It's been through Audit Committee. The track changes version are in the reading room if anyone's interested, but there's very, very few changes, and this is just the updated version for approval, please.
Yeah, this is basically to stop the chairman doing what he wants. Yeah,
That's exactly right, Chairman.
Yeah, no, I understand. Okay, very good. Agreed. Agreed. Any other business? We don't have any. So we're going to meet. Sorry, so that's the end of the meeting in public.
There's the meeting of the charitable trustees, Chairman, which is well. So that's a very short meeting. Which
is that in public?
Yes, absolutely in public.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, are you going to take us through this, Mark?
I can do, Chairman, but it'd be from memory because I can't. I've just been looking. I can't seem to find the report. There's a couple of key things on there, which is we've just appointed a new charitable. I don't know what the title is, but the replacement for Jason is a woman that starts. I think may have just started or just about to start. One of the two, who is very well qualified and very keen to come over and will continue the good work that Jason has done and put in place. And the fact that the advent of COVID, all huge downside, but one of the things, it raised the profile of the charity, the giving, the national NHS charities together, and we've got money from them. So it's all relatively good news. The other thing that's in the report, I think, suggests that we have a balance of around 3 million in the charitable funds, much of it for specific items, to be spent on specific items, but a number of them not. And we are trying to ensure that that money is spent in a timely fashion on the things that it was donated for. And the committee is taking actions to try and make sure that happens. Was there anything else in that paper, Kamara? Could you remind me, please?
I haven't got the...
I couldn't find it, unfortunately. I read it and then I can't find it today.
Richard, help us with this, please.
Can you hear me okay, Chairman?
If you sit forward.
Okay, how's that?
I can see a big face, yeah.
Just to follow up from what Mark said, and you...
No, I can't hear you.
Her induction, and she's currently reading through all the background documents. And just reporting, building on what Mark said about the budget, that includes some specific funding from NHS Charities Together, which is supporting the work of the BAME network, and also some of the wider wellbeing work to support staff and make a contribution towards the kaleidoscope work that Tina referenced earlier.
Okay. I feel slightly uncomfortable about all of this because we need a proper papers and things to do all of this. Where are they?
Chairman, they're separately put on the VBR. There is you should have had a hard copy in the pack that I gave you last week. But there's a separate meeting because it's really important that we meet as trustees and we don't meet as board directors. So it is we do have a separate agenda. We do have a separate paper. Which was published last Friday. I do see some board members nodding to say that they've actually seen that, but it was circulated around as a separate agenda and separate papers.
Have it.
Sorry?
Mark chairs the thing and he doesn't seem to have it.
Can I just say we have definitely got it. I think it's just Mark can't lay his hands on it at the moment.
I've received it and read it. It's just this morning when I came to find it again, I couldn't find it. But yes, we've had the papers. It all came out in due time. Hence I was saying I'm doing it from memory because I can't find the papers. That's my fault, nobody else's fault.
So is there anything on that paper that we need to agree or approve?
No, Chairman, it's for information in noting the report.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And you say there's a separate agenda item.
Yes, there's a separate agenda and separate report to that of the Trust Board, which, as I say, hard copy was given. So yes, it is there, and it is on VBR, and it, as I say, was circulated last week.
Okay, so there's nothing for us to do other than note it. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct, Chairman. Yes.
Okay. Okay, fine. I think that's all. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending the meeting. We're now going to move to meet in private. Kamara, is there? What time are we meeting in private?
The meeting can be open from 1 o'clock, Chairman. That's when I set it up. In your timetable, I did suggest perhaps 1:30 because I was unsure as to what time we'd finish this section of the board meeting. Okay. Time from 1 o'clock.
Fine. Can I suggest 1 o'clock that we reconvene in private? Thank you very much for your attendance. Bye.